life. And people often ask me, hey, you became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the Armed Forces of the United States. #1 position among 3 million soldiers in the military. You also are National Security Advisor to President Ronald Reagan. And you were chairman not only to President George Herbert Walker Bush, but also to President Bill Clinton, and then in George W. Bush, 43, you were Secretary of State. How did it all happen? I mean, it's ridiculous. How did this all happen? And I smiled, and then some people say to me, well, you were a kid growing up in the South Bronx. If you don't know what the South Bronx is, it's the poorest part of the borough of the Bronx in New York City. Well, you were growing up in the South Bronx, having been born in Harlem, immigrant parents. My parents came here in banana boats. Seriously, banana boats. My mother in 1920 and my father in 1924. They met here, married here, 2 children, me and my sister who became a teacher. And so when you were growing up in that neighborhood, did you have a dream that you could grow up and become chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or National Security Advisor or Secretary of State? And I just smile and say, yeah, I was. I believe I was about 10 years old. I was standing on the corner of 163rd and Kelly Street and said to myself, Sal, you're going to grow up and become chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the Armed Forces of the United States. No, it ain't the way it happened. It was beyond my dreams. It was beyond any aspirations I could have. I mean, we're talking about the 1940s. We're talking about executive segregated. We're talking about world wars that were going on. We were talking about a black kid who was from immigrant parents who were not particularly well educated. My father was a high school dropout. My mother finished high school in Jamaica before they came here. And they were laborers in New York City. They were in the garment industry and they worked constantly, both. And yet, it happened. It happened because of a number of things that blessed my life. One, these 2 immigrant parents that I had were terrific people. Somebody always asks me, who was the most important person in your life or people in your life? Well, they were. They weren't that well educated, but they cared about their family. And they were also part of an extended family. I had all these Jamaican immigrant relatives in my neighborhood. And I don't know if you've ever been around Jamaicans, they will get in your business. Get in your business. And so we lived in a neighborhood called Banana Kelly because that part of Kelly Street had a curve to it, so it was called Banana Kelly. And I had an aunt. The aunts are the ones that are the trouble in the family. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And so in this neighborhood, I had one of my aunts living in almost every other tenement building. And these women sat in the window all day long, leaning on a pillow, looking down on the street to catch one of us getting in trouble. And if it happened, you're going to be in real trouble when you get home that night, or they come down right now and beat you. And they were always there. Every time I looked up, there was one of them. They never went to the bathroom. They never cooked. They were always up there waiting for us to do something wrong. And that helped me a great deal because we all of us cousins knew that these folks were there to keep us in play. And what they said to us constantly, we have expectations for you. We didn't come to this country to blow it. We didn't come to America. We didn't come on banana boats. We're not working down in the garment industry for minimum wages so that you could stick something up your nose, or you could drop out of school, or you could get in trouble, or you could go to jail. But we have expectations for you, and we expect you to do better than we did. I could never do better than my parents, I don't think. Never thought I could. But I knew what they expected me and my sister and all my extended cousins to do. And the other thing they drilled into us is whatever you do, don't shame the family. Don't shame the family. And there was many a day when I had done something, wrong or got in trouble for something or other. And as I went back to my apartment and waited for my parents to come home to deal with my misdemeanor or felony, whatever I'd done, and I got in trouble. I would just sit there saying, oh God, look, when they come in here, just take a belt and hit me. But don't give me that shame in the family bit. But that's what they always did. You shame the family. You shame the family. And that made me feel worse than anything else they could have done or said to me or about me. And they also said we expected in a school. Public high school, public elementary school, public middle school. I didn't go to West Point. I didn't go to any of the fancy military colleges, the Citadel, South Carolina, or VMI, or Virginia, or Texas A&M. I couldn't go to them in those days because I was black. And they were all white. I couldn't go to them. So I went to school in New York City, public school, kindergarten all the way through college. And it was free. My parents didn't have to pay anything. Because the citizens of the city of New York felt that they had no greater obligation to the city and to the future of the city than to educate children. And that's what they did, and that's what they did for me. I was not a great student. I'm not the one to bring here and say you all want to go get A's. I hope you do. You should get A's. But man, I was straight C. Kindergarten through college. And I can prove it. Because when I was writing my first book, my memoirs, my life story of being a big shot, I wrote to the Board of Education of the City of New York to refresh my memory as to my grades, and they had every report card from kindergarten through college. You know how shocking that can be to read your report cards from kindergarten through college and see nothing but C, C, D, D, B, D, D, D. That was me. But I couldn't ever think about dropping out. Because if I had ever walked home down that street with all those aunts watching, if I had ever stepped into my house and said, Mom, you know what, I'm not doing that well and I'm tired of this, and I'm going to drop out, then you drop me out. We'll get rid of you and get some other kid. You know? You're not doing this stuff. Oh, no. We didn't come here for you to screw this all up. And so you get your butt back to school. Don't even think twice about it. My neighborhood also had a church, and I was baptized in Episcopal. That became my lifelong religion. They also had a library, a public library that I could go to get away from the street. They also had a lot of shops, a lot of immigrant shops. The Jewish baker, the Italian shoemaker, the Jewish candy store owner, the bodegas. I learned about 4 different languages as I grew up in the South. I don't remember much of it, but you'd be surprised how good it is, especially if you speak a little Yiddish. Because I learned a little Yiddish working in a Jewish toy store. And this Jewish toy store I ended up in, happened to walk in by the store one day, and the manager came out, the owner came out. I was about 15 years old, and he said to me, "Lou, you want to make a few dollars?" Sure. Come, work. And I worked in the store unloading trucks. And after a couple of years of doing that on my summer vacation and at Christmas time, he came up to me one day, and he put his arm around me, and he said, "Colin," my Jewish, Yiddish diminutive name, Colin. He said, "Colin, you're a good worker, but I don't ever want you to think you can stay here in the store. The store will go to my son-in-law. The store will stay in the family. Colin, you got a good family. You get your education, and you do something with yourself. Don't ever think you're going to work in the store." I thanked him, and I've written about him because I never planned to work in the store for the rest of my life. But he thought enough about me. He thought enough about me to say, "Go get your education." And that's what I did. Straight C, all the way through.
Amen.
It wasn't that I was dumb. Obviously not dumb. It's just that I was kind of undirected. I didn't know what I wanted. I entered college when I was still 16. What do I know from anything? And I, nevertheless, knew that education was important and I had to get it. And I knew that my parents would never accept a kid who dropped out of high school. And so finally, after I'd been at the City College in New York for about 4.5 years, studying geology, I had flunked out of, no, I dropped out of engineering. You need engineering. I dropped out of engineering and gone into geology to stay in school and get a degree. But I found the ROTC. which is military training, as you know. And in ROTC, I found guys like me, poor immigrant kids, who were planning to get some military training. Some of them would go in the Army, some would not. But I found a new family, I found a tribe, I found a bunch of guys that I could hang out with. And we all had immigrant parents that are keeping us in play. And so that turned me on. That's it, man. And I got straight A's in ROTC. And so after I'd been there about 4.5 years, the administration of the college said, well, what are we going to do with this? Is he ever going to leave? And they said, well, look at his grades in ROTC. They're so good. So let's roll his ROTC grades in with his other grades and see what it gives us. So they did. It brought me up to 2.0. Good enough for government work. Get him out of here. We'll never see him again. And then I'm back. And I have been back in my college many times now. And they named the whole school, the college, after me.
Wow.
It's called the Colin Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership. It's part of the City College of New York now. They did it 3 years ago. And they wanted to recognize the fact that I came out of those modest circumstances and drove to the top of my profession. And people often say, well, how did it, you got out of school, but how did you make it to the Army? Things were still segregated then. People were looking down at you because you were black. Even in the military, where integration had occurred, we're sure that people were kind of wondering if you could make it just because you're black. I said, yeah, I faced that for my entire career. But here's what I'm going to forget. When I left New York and went into the Army at age 21 as a brand new lieutenant, I went to the infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia, right outside of Columbus, Georgia. And the sergeants who were in charge of us at that time said to me, now listen, Lieutenant Powell, yes sir, remember, we don't care if your parents are immigrants, we don't care if you're black. We don't care if you grew up at Harlem or the South Bronx or anywhere else. So don't walk in here giving us any of that hard luck stuff. We don't care. You're now in the Army, you're green like all the rest of us. Well, hello. You're green like all the rest of us. And the only thing we care about is, do you perform? And do you have potential to go up? And that was it. It was 1958. It was 4 years after they formally ended segregation in the Army. The country was still segregated. Fort Benning was integrated, but Columbus right outside was as segregated as it could be. So segregated that once when I came back from Vietnam, I'd been hurt, a new family. I was driving back to the base one night and wanted to get a hamburger, and went up to the hamburger stand, and the nice young lady there said, are you an African student at the infantry school? No. Are you a Puerto Ricano at the infantry school?